Welcome to Data Forward, the podcast that keeps you ahead in the fast-evolving world of enterprise AI and data management. We bring you expert insights, actionable strategies, and the latest trends to help you stay on top. Ready to shape the future of data? Let's Data Forward.
All right. Well, welcome back to another Data Forward podcast. And I am so excited today. I have Merv Adrian on with me. Merv is an industry veteran. IT strategy is his company. I've known Merv for many, many years, and it's great to have you on, Merv.
Thank you. I prefer to describe myself as an old guy at this point, but yeah, that'll work.
No, don't say that. Then I'll have to be in your same class. So we don't want that. So Merv, you've had this remarkable career in IT and consulting. You've been at Forrester, Gartner, all of the major consulting firms, and now you're a BARC fellow. And for those who may not know, BARC is an industry firm that's renowned for its insights on data, AI, and enterprise software in general. Guiding companies with research and consulting. And so congrats on the recognition, Merv.
Thank you. It's a really interesting opportunity. If you'd like to know a little bit more about it, I don't want to bore your listeners, but it is a little interesting.
Tell us a little bit about it.
So, as you pointed out, I've worked for large research firms, and I kind of got to the end of that and decided to move into a next stage of my career and just become an independent, which I've done once before. Between my 10 years at Forrester and Gartner, I did it for a couple of years. I decided to go back to it, and that's been going well. That's the company IT Market Strategy that you referred to, and that's still operating. But last year, I had a conversation with my friend Sean Rogers, who I've known as long as I've known you. He's been in the industry forever, and Sean is the CEO of the new American unit of BARC, which until now was predominantly a Central European firm. One of the challenges of leaving the large research organizations is not having this infrastructure to do primary research. And I'm not interested in being a pundit. I'm interested in doing research and talking to people about what we know to be real. So Sean and I hatched the idea that with this AI thing really starting to take off, it would be interesting to understand, how are people thinking about it? How are they getting ready? What are their challenges? How are they going to measure things? What technologies do they think about? Are they going to use service providers? All those kinds of questions. And there wasn't much data, so we decided we'd create some. And we did a survey that wound up speaking to 335 firms worldwide across a variety of industries, and asked them a whole series of questions like that. And that's the research we've published. We were so happy with the outcome that Sean said to me, we're going to have this role within BARC called a fellow, which is not an everyday role where you are taking inquiries and, the same kind of job you used to have. This will be project oriented. When something looks good, we'll agree on whether we're going to do it or not. And so essentially the BARC fellow is a role that gives me the opportunity to pick and choose projects. If I think I want to do something, I can go pitch it to them. If they think they want to do something, they can come pitch it to me. And as long as we agree on what it's worth, we go forward. So it's a nice role for me that gives me access to that research engine underneath to field and do the number crunching on primary data, because that's the thing that interests me.
That's absolutely fantastic, Merv. And I'm really glad you did this research, because that's one of the main topics that we're going to discuss today is your findings in that research. We're going to talk about some of the research and the information that you uncovered with how companies are thinking about their data architecture and their data infrastructure. But first, let's talk about sort of the AI readiness in general, right?
Sure.
The survey showed that it's not only on the radar, but it's a board level priority, right? And everybody knows this by now. But what are the kinds of things that sort of struck you as you conducted this research, and how are people thinking about AI in general?
Sure. Well, the board reference that you made is actually to a survey that BARC had already done. They do a regular survey of CEOs and a survey of board people, like some other research firms do. And what they were discovering was that organizations are finding, and when I say organizations, IT folks, are finding the board members walking in with bags of money in their hands saying, please do some AI. We don't care what it is, but we know we need one. Years ago, we used to refer to this as airline magazine syndrome. So the boss would get off the plane and he'd say, "Do we have one of those? What color is it? And who can use it?"
That's right.
So that has triggered an enormous amount of questioning by CTOs, CIOs, architects saying, what are we going to do? And how ready are we for how different is this? And what are the steps to being really prepared? And that was the focus of the research. We identified several categories of readiness, and we asked people to self-identify how far along that readiness path they were. And what I mean by readiness was, we're not even talking about it yet. We're completely unready is one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum is we actually have a policy statement. We have some guidelines. We've discussed it with stakeholders, and maybe we've even got it into some form of production, or perhaps even be revising it. What we found when we asked these questions, we asked people to rate themselves across 7 different categories of readiness. And if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you what they were. One was simply identifying who's going to be the leadership. Second was, what are your security and compliance standards related to this? What are your data access and use policies? What legal considerations do we have to be thinking about? What are our AI program standards and policies? What is the project governance and oversight going to look like? And finally, what will the enterprise architecture requirements be? Those are all different, and they are in many ways different than the way we think about some of those same issues in conventional projects we've done in the past. The stakes are frankly a lot higher, and there's a lot more unknown unknowns out there. And so policies and ownership and compliance really have to be thought about before we stub our toes on them. Again, because the stakes are very high and everybody wants to get going right away.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of sort of AI-driven fear of missing out, right? So doing it the right way, and you uncovered, I think, a lot of the top challenges to success, skills being the number one on the list, and then cost and budget being the second. What are some of the ones that really stood out to you?
Sure. And yes, FOMO is real. One of my favorite slides is that, keep calm and carry on. Slide.
That's right.
Because everybody really thinks they've got to get going right away. And yes, of course, it's important to get started, but not to rush into it without thinking about these things. So skills was absolutely the number one concern as an obstacle across the entire set. But we identified, and I should take a minute to discuss this if you don't mind. When we went through that readiness stuff, what we found was that 21% of the respondents identified themselves in the highest readiness category across all 7 of those criteria I just described. And this is the beauty of primary research. You get results that you don't necessarily expect, and you get a chance to do something about it. We immediately said, let's go back and run the numbers again. Let's take that set of people, call them the high readiness people, and compare the answers they gave to the general answer. And so as we talk about some of these topics, you'll find a couple places where I'll say, the leaders were different here. And the first one is this skills thing. Interestingly, the folks who had already started, who had gotten a little farther down the road, who we identified as high readiness, skills was not their number one priority. And maybe that's why they got there a little faster, or obstacle, I should say. What they said was cost. Now, this is something you can categorize in the hard lessons learned category, right? They've done the work, and not surprisingly, I guess, in anything related to IT, they found out it was costing them more than they thought it would. So that one really, really leaped out at us. By the way, everybody thought it would be, but they rated it higher. We found a significant number of people saw a fundamental obstacle in integration issues. Drilling a little deeper, and we will do that in some future research, one of the most critical places for that problem is data. one of the things that AI projects in general tend to assume is they're going to look at everything. It's not isolated data. In fact, the more
Right.
data from the more places you bring in, the more valuable it's going to be. That raises
Exactly.
questions of integration, and people were already identifying that. And they identified the problem of data quality, relatively highly. Not quite as much as the top ones, but there were several categories that relate to it. Model indemnification and trust rated very high because people see this as something they don't understand yet. Well, when you think about building models, the phrase "garbage in, garbage out" has never been more true. If you don't have the data correct, if it's not trustable, if you don't have observability to understand the state of your data, you're not going to get very. You're gonna wind up with a very nice looking thing built on false premises, and that's almost like the human equivalent of the hallucinations that come out of large language models.
Exactly. Well, it's a great transition to the next section of this podcast, which is really talk about data management and data architecture. And you mentioned data observability, of course. Thank you very much. Excel Data is in the business of providing a data observability platform. And we are seeing a lot of that, right? The data observability that helps with data reliability and data quality is really driving into large enterprises, not only for AI, but also to meet the traditional dashboards and reports and compliance, all of those things that people have struggled with for years. And so let's talk a little bit, though, about sort of data management and architecture, because in the second half of your research paper, it really delves into some of the newer technologies and, how they fit in the context of being AI ready, getting your data AI ready. What are some other things that stood out beyond data observability to you?
Well, the things that came in ranking very highly are probably no surprise to folks who were paying attention to this category. 2 years ago, nobody knew what a vector database was. Now everybody needs one, right?
Mhm.
A couple of years ago, we were talking about feature stores, and that seemed to drop off the list for a little while. But it's going to come back, and a lot of people were still identifying it. Um, Folks are very concerned about um, responsible AI. And what happens here is an interesting extension of perhaps what the old formal data quality initiatives did. Um, we know where it came from. We know it's correct. We know, we've decided on the version of the truth. All that stuff is really important. But when you dig deeper, and observability, of course, as you know well, does this. And we didn't ask enough about observability. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But understanding provenance, understanding ownership, allows you to make decisions about trust that go beyond what we think of, quality means, is it right or is it wrong? It means a lot more than that. Who owns this? What can we do to ensure that we don't bias things with the data we use? One of the most common problems, and frankly, it's a problem of the research industry, is the problem of deciding what you're going to study, coming up with your conclusion, then go finding the data to prove it.
They call that research bias, Merv, right?
Well, yeah, it's actually one of the cognitive errors, right? There's a whole set of errors that you can make. Consider a conference where you're going to make a speech, and you have a headline, and you say we need some use cases, right? Well, you go out and you pick some people that exemplify the point you're trying to make. That's not the same thing as asking an open-ended question and getting the results. And so when you select the data that you're going to feed the model, you don't want that data to be prejudiced by income, by industry, by geography. All of those things can affect how the model will then construct its own internal map that it uses to answer questions. And this is the source of hallucinations, but some hallucinations can be a lot easier to detect than others. I did what I think everybody did when ChatGPT first came out. I went and asked it to describe me, and it got it completely wrong, you know. But I was able to see those errors because I know me. But when we're asking
That's right.
complex questions of a very large corpus of data, that was in fact subject to this kind of selection bias. Or the phrase that I was groping for a minute ago is called confirmation bias. We choose the stuff that
Mhm.
seems to back the point of view that we think we're going after. If we don't guard against that, then we're going to get bad results, and we may not even know they're bad results. That's very subtle, and only a very, very well-constructed observability platform coupled with a set of policies that are designed to look for this issue and guard against it is going to help us solve that. And the stakes are so high here because
Oh, immensely.
these things, when they really go into production, are going to be black boxes in a way that most industries have not relied upon them before. The financial services industry for a long time has had highly proprietary black boxes that did things like, risk analysis for options trading or whatever, and nobody knew how they worked, but they trusted that the math that went into them was sound. There's a lot more factors here than the correctness of computation.
Yeah, you make excellent points. I think, data observability is cleaning and making sure that the pipelines are reliable and the data is well formed and can be trusted to feed into these AI models. But definitely the next leg of the stool, as you're describing, is, are these models behaving as expected? Technologies such as anomaly detection, right, that have a baseline. It's ironic because you're kind of using AI to help with data management that in terms takes the data that feeds AI. So there's this sort of, self-fulfilling prophecy, whatever you want to call it, right?
I'm
Circular
going to throw a provocative phrase at you here.
Yeah.
Models are data too.
Models of data too. That's great.
And they are going to have to be subject to the same set of ops standards, versioning, and production criteria, guarding for drift. Models will drift. Data changes.
Yep.
And what is the feedback loop? There's a lot of understanding, I think, now of sort of that first load to build the model. Now we've got the thing and we run it. But stuff changes. What happens when new facts come in? What is our process for ingesting new data, for recognizing changes in the model? And how do we understand that the results we got 3 months ago and the results we got today may need to be different? And what is our understanding of that delta and what caused it? These are new ideas, and frequently it's data doesn't change, but data gets added to. Data does change, of course. That's why we have database management systems to go in and make changes to them. But lots of data evolves. New things emerge, and that's what we use analytics to determine, how are the trends shifting? Have there been any new things popping up? Were those things accounted for in the first build of this model? When's the last time we ran it again? Those questions are going to be very important.
Yeah, the full observability context of lineage, historical audit, being able to trace back environments, seasonality, things, all of those things need to be captured. So it's not just about the here and now and the policies that trigger when you see something that's not quite right. You then have to do root cause analysis, and somebody's tasked, right? Data engineers are tasked with going and solving that problem and correcting those issues. And they need a lot of help, right? You talked about skills gap earlier.
Yes.
Right. I mean, there's people right now today, in the data engineering organization and the data ops teams that are just running around, plugging holes in dikes that are leaking when things occur which are unexpected. So we're in the age of a platform that's required to help automate, help augment, and manage and assist these hardworking data engineers that are looking to solve this, and now AI is on their plate.
So that takes us back to your question again of what sorts of technologies are these high readiness people adopting at a higher rate? And some of those, where we compare them to the general population, some of them are obvious. They figured out optimized hardware for this stuff is going to be needed. We sort of get that already. But some of them are interesting ones. Knowledge graphs.
Yes.
Much, much, much more readiness and, in fact, production in this high readiness group for knowledge graphs. For the overall group, it was less than 50%. For the folks who were high readiness, it was 77% are already in production using a knowledge graph, because, again, it helps them understand the relationships among this data. We may think we know the quality, but to your point, provenance is part of the knowledge graph, right?
Yes.
Ownership, relationship to other data, those things are vital, and we need a way to understand them. Model management and monitoring are already at 78% among those high readiness.
Let's bring this back. There's all these technologies that are required, but who's going to pay for all of this, right? on your challenge, second in high priority to skills was costs and budget, right?
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, I'm sure you're aware that data observability also will give you the inefficiencies and identify the extraneous costs, the over provisioning, the wasted sort of processing flow, cleaning up data that nobody's looking at, yes, right, in terms of inefficiencies. So there's really what I would call, pennies under the couch cushion, if you will, that you can uncover as a consequence of doing observability right. How are people thinking in your survey about where they're going to find this money to fund all of this? Do they just feel like the board will approve it, and as you said at the beginning, they'll throw money at them? Or are they coming up with more creative ways to kind of find the budgets?
I think this is one of the rare cases where we can talk about funding as good news. The truth is, the appetite for funding these projects, as I said at the very beginning, is very high. There's not a sense that if we go ask for money to get this done, that we're not going to get it. However, it's always critical to be able to justify the spending in terms of the outcome desired. And that was a very big focus of the survey. How are you defining success, right? Because this is new enough that just to say we got this thing up and it's in production, the way it might work with a typical analytic project or a data transactional project, it's up and running. That's great. We got it done. Check. Mission accomplished. This is going to be a little bit more subtle. So the ability to say, what should the money be spent on and how should it be spent is going to be critical to connecting budget and strategy. So one of the questions is, where does that happen? Now, as a longtime IT guy and a guy who put it in the name of his company, I'm delighted to say that we're swimming upstream against a long-standing trend here. For years, we've been talking about how budget authority and spending have been moving out of IT and out into the business units. When we asked the respondents to this survey, who is influencing the projects, it was the highest rate of it's IT as an answer we've seen in a very, very long time. It was by far the leading answer, both strategy and budget. So that's good news, because it means that there is some comprehension among the funding entities that they need to ask the experts, what should we be spending our money on? There are a couple of corollaries to that. And one is that, given what we already said about the concern about skills, most organizations are recognizing that they will probably use partners in the service provider industry. So like the initial rollout of ERP a couple of decades ago, I think this is going to be a gold rush for service provider companies. And intriguingly, one of the things we uncovered, this was one of the surprises, one of the things I love about primary research. One of the things we heard was that, no, we're not planning to go to the largest SI we know, one of the big global guys, because we don't think they're any farther ahead than our regional people. And in fact, We think regional SIs are probably the best bet because we know them, we work with them, they know us, and they know what's important around here, which may not be the same as global issues. AI is going to tease out differences among geographies and industries a great deal. And, if you're following this, I'm sure you're already seeing, everybody knows we need LLMs, but people are increasingly becoming interested in smaller models. Highly specific ones. And actually, we have some research in this study about that.
So, Merv, this has been absolutely fantastic, and really appreciate you coming on. You were, when we've been through a lot, back in the days of Forrester Master Data Management, and then at Rainstorm, you and I teamed up when it was the era of Hadoop and big data. And big data is interesting, right? So this will be a topic for another podcast.
Sure.
So I hope you'll come stay on. But just in your mind, sort of the evolution of sort of people who still have legacy systems and on-premise, everybody is thinking about shifting to the cloud. How is AI going to influence all of this?
There is this massive transformation underway. It's largely done, and we've even seen a little bit of movement retrograde back. Everybody's moving to the cloud, right? But some of that stuff that we called big data back when you and I were doing all that stuff was massive amounts of spinning metal on premises. And that is a sunk cost, and that data still matters. And the platforms we bought to keep it on have still some years left in them. And the notion that we're going to pick all that up and move it to the cloud, even though it's theoretically not so expensive there, is holding a lot of people back. Lots of data is staying on-prem. Some is even coming back. Just a small amount of repatriation going on. The key thing about this whole big data thing is that big data was very largely about the stuff that wasn't in the systems of record, the production systems, being used every day. It was all this other data. And it is all that other data that's informing the whole AI thing. It's like, if we can look at all that other stuff, we'll have a much richer view. It's more important than it's ever been. The fact that the technology stack we were looking at 15 years ago has largely become, at least perceptually, obsolete and become replaced by some newer technologies. Well, that's another topic for another conversation. And yes, we should talk about it. I have some thoughts about it. But I want to say one last thing about what we've been talking about so far. This research was about early adoption and planning and strategy formation. We learned a lot. We learned a few more questions we want to ask. That's almost a definition of good research, that it raises new questions you want to do some more research about. Perhaps that's self-serving, perpetuating my job. But the next question, the next high-level question to ask is, so how's that going for you?
Exactly.
And we want to go back now. We dropped that survey at the end of last year and fielded it and got the research out the beginning of this year. The research that's going to come out at the beginning of next year is going to ask many of the same questions and a few new ones of people who are actually in production. And the core behind it will be, so how's that going for you? We want to find out what they've learned now that they've actually got it running. And we're very excited about that research.
Well, we'll definitely have you on if you're amenable once that research comes out, Merv. Thank you again for joining me. It's such a pleasure and an honor as always, my friend. And I see your guitar in the background. Maybe next time we'll have a little bit of a riff here when we comes down to it. Thanks again.
People can find me at itmarketstrategy.com, by the way. And there's even a little music on there. So there you go.
There you go. Merv at itstrategy.com.
itmarketstrategy.com.
itmarketstrategy.com.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, Merv. Take
care.
care.
All right, my friend. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Data Forward podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest insider news, be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.